Sorry.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. My name is Ben Eden, your host, and today I get to welcome Christy Maxey. Hello, Christy.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Glad you could join. Christy, I know that you used to be a therapist, and now you do a lot of coaching. You've also written a workbook. You've done all sorts of good things, helping a lot of people, and you have a lot of things to teach. But I'd like to hear from your own mouth who you are and what you do.
Okay. So yes, I was a therapist for 20 years. I think I knew as a child I would be a therapist at some point because I was fascinated with human behavior, specifically with emotions and how we never talk about them. So anyway, yeah, I became a therapist and I was in private practice for 20 years. And then a few years ago, I decided to transition into coaching. And I started making that transition, I don't know, I guess it's been a couple of years now. So yeah, I'm a personal development transformational coach.
Very good. And tell us a bit more about why you decided to make that transition, especially after 20 years of doing therapy.
Well, I had been thinking about it for several years because I think one of my biggest frustrations was that when I was a therapist, I'd be sitting in the office thinking, why doesn't everybody know about some of these tools and skills and things that I was teaching people? It just didn't seem right that it was just for people who had the privilege of going to therapy. And so I always imagined I'd get out and write some manuals sometime and I'd go into coaching. But I stayed in my comfort zone for probably 10 years that I'd been thinking about that. And then a few years ago, I actually went through a rough time of my own. I had lost a sister to cancer. We had some tragedies in my family. I was out of a relationship. I was single again. And I was just busy working. And then at some point I said, you know what, I've got to get this addressed. And so I went to a therapist, as I usually, I do when I need to. And nothing was happening. So I tried a different therapist. And I was really kind of frustrated because nothing happened there either. And I remember during, I had been paying money and spending time trying this. And I sat in my car thinking, I don't get it. What do I do with my clients? Because I'm all about results. And I thought, well, I'm going to do it for me. So I pretty much did what I do with my clients on me. Every morning I'd wake up and I'd do some work. And then at the end of it, I got out of my grief, my severe grief, and I realized I was living small, and that's when I wanted to go into coaching.
Very nice. A couple questions come up from there. For the benefit of the audience, you having been a former therapist and now a coach, shed a little bit of light for us on what the difference between a therapist and a coach is.
It's a really good question. I don't know that anybody has any clear-cut answers, but I think the most clear-cut answer is the difference between a therapist and a coach is a therapist can evaluate and give a diagnosis. Actually, or a psychologist should be giving the diagnosis, but therapy really addresses specific, or it can address diagnoses, and coaching cannot. I don't do any kind of diagnosing. I don't do any kind of evaluation or assessment, and I kind of like it that way. So that's the biggest difference that I see.
Okay. And what kind of results does a therapist go towards versus what does a coach strive for?
These are really good questions. So, okay. So the way I have seen it since I'm doing both, I have even become more directed as a coach than I was a therapist. And as a therapist, a lot of times you're a generalist. You work with a lot of different people with a lot of different issues, diagnoses, whatever. And as a coach, you're pretty much encouraged to cut niche and become more directive in your approach. And I kind of like that because, and I think there are some therapists also, like you'll find therapists that are trauma informed, or they work with trauma, or they work with PTSD or only depression or anxiety. But for the most part, most therapists are generalists. Now, coaches can be, there's like a combination. I think some coaches do get more specific in what they work with. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. There's a lot of different, well, let's see. I think another one maybe is that when you go to a coach, oftentimes you're paying privately, people want to see results. You know, a lot of times with therapy, people might use their insurance, so they have like a $20 copay, you know, and so a lot of times, I mean, I had this happen, people would just come to me and just want to chat, and it's not my favorite thing to do as a therapist or a coach. I like to help people and really make results. So I don't know, there's some of those nuances also.
Sure. And fair enough.
That
Yeah, that's okay. The purpose of that question was simply to help some people see a little bit of the difference. Like you say, there's probably not one perfect sentence that says, here's the difference. And if a therapist or a coach is listening to this, they might have their own opinion.
Exactly. That is very, very true.
Yeah, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
it's just to shed some light for the listeners to say, okay, I understand a little bit better what the difference between a therapist is and a coach is and why I might go to one over the other. They're both very valuable. Okay, another thing that I wanted to point out was that you, even as a therapist, you sought out help, which is valuable. I think that can be a barrier in many of our minds that says, no, I shouldn't need help because of my training, my title, my background, my profession, whatever, and I shouldn't need help. Well, guess what? We all experience emotions, and one of the first steps is being honest with ourselves and sometimes taking a little dose of humility maybe and reaching out to somebody, right? So I think it's valuable that you did that, and good things have come from it, haven't it?
Yeah.
Good.
I've never had a problem doing that.
Awesome.
I see the value in it for everybody because, as you said, we're all humans, and even therapists, even coaches. Like I just saw something about Tony Robbins, and he was talking about how he sees a coach and how valuable it is for him. And so, yeah, I think that unless you want to stop growing, you should probably always at some point see somebody to help you. There's a lot of reasons to see somebody to help you. You know, if you're grieving or if you're stuck. Or if you want to, if you're stuck in a mindset that's not helping you.
Whether we know it or not, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I think one of the main things is there's stigma around it's not okay, especially for men. I don't know if you notice that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's even more so for males. And there's nothing wrong with getting help. I'd like to throw that little myth out the window.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and it is sometimes more apparent with men because maybe we think society tells us that we're supposed to be the fixers and we're supposed to solve the problems and we're supposed to figure it out ourselves to show that we're the dominant whatever. But we all have those emotions. I can speak from experience and talking to people I know. If we give ourselves permission to feel and permission to reach out and ask for help, then wow, the growth that we receive. Otherwise, we suffer in silence and we turn to behaviors that are destructive and everything else that we talk about.
Exactly.
So let's move into, what did you learn? You said you went through some tough times over the last couple of years, and you said, well, what do I do with my patients or clients, whatever you call them? And maybe I'll try it with myself. And then you created it into something specific that you could share with your coaching clients. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so at the end of that, when I decided I wanted to go into coaching, I wrote down what I did, and it came out to be the word method, or the acronym for the word method. And it stands for mindfulness, emotions, thoughts, healing, own your dreams, and do it now. So so I call it a framework for personal development, and I call it the MAX method, MAXX method, because my last name is Maxey. And actually, a friend of mine named it for me. She actually lives in Utah.
Oh, very nice.
So yeah, she said, you need to call these, because I was talking about maybe writing these manuals. She goes, you need to call them MAX manuals. And then I said, Chris, I came up with this thing that's like an acronym. And she goes, you need to call it MAX method. I would have never thought, but anyway. Yes. And so I actually took that method, that personal or the framework, and I wrote a workbook that was recently just published and released. And it's focused on how to love yourself and become who you're meant to be,
Very nice.
using each of those concepts as a chapter.
Mm-hmm. Tell us once more what the acronym stands for.
Mindfulness, I can explain it a little bit. Mindfulness,
Sure, go ahead.
because one of the things that I've seen for years, and I did Gestalt training early in my career, and I don't know if you know much about Gestalt therapy or Gestalt work, is it's very much about awareness. We can't change anything until you first become aware of what is. And so I mean, it's kind of become a new thing recently, but I mean, I knew this for years. Yeah, you've got to become more conscious of what's going on. And what I like about mindfulness, and why I use that term rather than awareness, is because mindfulness is about a specialized awareness with acceptance. A lot of times we'll be aware, like, oh, I don't feel good, and then we judge it. Or a lot of times we feel like, oh, I'm stuck in my career, I'm miserable in my relationship, and we're aware of it, but we judge it. And that's what keeps us stuck. So mindfulness is awareness without judgment. Emotions is managing your emotions, again, with mindfulness, without judgment. And thoughts are becoming aware of your thinking and clearing out the limiting beliefs that are holding you back. Healing is, I use a lot of inner child healing because I think it works, and visualization. I also use EMDR, which is a tool. And then what I discover with my clients, and even with myself when I was going through it, is once we get through healing and we start feeling better and lighter, then we start dreaming again. So the O is for own your dreams. And that's when I decided I'm going into coaching. And those last two concepts came later to me, actually. So, I mean, I realized, okay, I've got this O, and I'm like, oh, okay, own your dreams. I'm going into coaching. Well, then the D came a little bit later when I was hiking one day and thinking, I felt stuck in how I'm going to get this coaching business going. And I was like, oh, D for, I got to do it. I got to do it. Do it now. And because there's a lot of times when we'll have dreams and we get stuck, usually because of a negative belief or a negative emotion like fear might be keeping us stuck. And so that's how I came up with the method. But I see many of my clients do the same thing. Once they go through the healing process, then they're like, I'm going to Europe, or I'm going to culinary school, or I'm going to fine art school. And it's been really fun seeing that.
Yeah, and that's why I've said that, I help young adults overcome emotional pain so that they can unlock their potential and build their dreams, because that same effect happens. As soon as we can be aware of the emotions, understand and acknowledge them, then we're like, oh, I'm free to do what I wanted to do in the first place, right?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
Thank you. So let's go back to the E, of course, since we talk about emotions a lot on this podcast. Being aware without judging. Tell us some more about that.
Okay, so in Gestalt, there's a phrase called the paradoxical theory of change. And that is, you cannot change anything. It seems like a paradox because we have been taught that if there's something going on, push it away. It's not good. Push it away. Get rid of it. Judge it. If we have weight, let's say we're overweight. Don't like it. And then you'll do something about it. As if that is going to motivate us to change. Well, research is starting to show us that it doesn't work that way. And so the paradoxical theory of change is accepting the emotion, allowing it to be there. I do a lot of visualization on imagine inviting your anger in. Allow it to be there. Hello, my anger, there you are. Because when you allow that emotion, whatever it is, you relax into it. And when you judge it, when you fight it, when you resist it, when you self-medicate it, when you avoid it, all those things, it actually makes it worse.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't go away, huh?
No, and I'll tell you, I noticed this in my practice, and I read an article once, and I wish I could find it again, and because it was a research paper, and it talked about how most mental illness is unresolved trauma and issues. That's pretty big.
Yeah.
And I saw it over and over and over again. People would come in, and I wrote about it in my book. They'd be in the storm of emotions, anxiety and depression and overwhelming. And when we dig in there, when we first, when I can get them to the point where they can be okay, this is what's going on for me with acceptance, then they see that sure enough, there's unresolved pain or unresolved trauma that hasn't been addressed.
There you go. And that's why I say emotional pain is unresolved emotions. There you go. So that's big. Now, here's something I really wanted to discuss with you, especially because of your background with therapy and now a coach. Tell us what you saw with your clients and what you saw in the practice as a whole with diagnoses and labels, and how, I mean, hopefully they were all done correctly, but maybe there were some times where a diagnosis was just slapped on somebody and then they started to live their lives according to that label that was given them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, right off the bat, what I saw was people were overdiagnosed. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get out of therapy. I kind of wanted out of the pathology, and that's what mental health is. It's looking at diagnosing and giving a label to something, a disorder, when what I saw, a big percentage of the time were people that didn't have an illness, and which was really frustrating for me and sad. So I think people are overdiagnosed. I think what happens in the mental health field, when somebody comes in with insurance, to use that insurance, you have to have a diagnosis code. Mm-hmm. And so as therapists, you're kind of caught, and you try to find, okay, what's going to be the least benign diagnosis code to give this person so their insurance will pay for the treatment. And I guess I'm sort of a whistleblower when I say this, but it never felt right for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have to do, of course, a lot of things could fit into adjustment disorder with anxiety, or adjustment disorder with depression, or adjustment disorder with both. Because adjustment disorder is if you go through a divorce, or if you have a change of career, or if you have this major change in your life. The only thing with me is that I never saw that it was helpful to have that diagnosis. Now, I think it can be if you're talking about a serious diagnosis like schizophrenia or bipolar or schizoaffective. All diagnoses are correctly done. This is another thing, by a psychologist who has been trained in using measurable, standardized tools to rule out or to obtain a diagnosis. So therapists, we can do questioning, and we can say, okay, well, that fits this criteria in the DSM-4 diagnostic manual. But officially, really, who can give a real diagnosis is a psychologist who gives a thorough evaluation using standardized tools.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to make it clear for the listeners that the point of this conversation is not to destroy any faith in therapists and coaching and say, wow, who am I supposed to turn to? What I personally learned by going to a therapist, and the things that I've studied and people that I've spoken to, a lot of it comes down to research the help that you're going to be given, right? Don't just, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do this, and now they're going to heal me. Most of the time that attitude doesn't work. Then realize that your body, since it's designed to heal, is going to tell you what it needs. And the more you can learn to listen to it, and then work with experts and this, that, and the other, then you can get the healing that you need. So I have just seen that sometimes we attach ourselves to labels in such a way that now we define ourselves by it, when many times That label is used to put a barrier on what we're experiencing, but it's not a permanent thing about us. When we understand and acknowledge our emotions, which I say all the time, then we have power over them. Then we say, yes, I used to feel this, but that's not me anymore. Now I know how to control it. If it comes back, I know what to do. It doesn't mean, oh, I guess I'm still defined by this label. So everything that I do in this podcast is to say, once you understand and acknowledge your emotions, you have power over them. And here are different ways, talking to different experts and different people with experience, different ways that you can have power over those emotions. I hope that's clear to everybody.
Yeah, a lot of good points in there.
Mm-hmm.
I always recommend, when you do look for somebody to help you, to find 3 to 5 people and get, a lot of times referrals is helpful from friends if you can, whether it be a therapist or coach, and call them and screen them over the phone and ask them, how can you help me? This is what's going on for me. How can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because it is very confusing. People don't know. People call me and they're like, are you a psychologist? Are you a psychiatrist? You give medications? And people don't know. And it's, I understand that they don't know. But I like that. Research it and educate yourself and make an informed decision.
Absolutely. And a majority of people give a free initial consultation. Do you agree with that?
I didn't see that a lot in the world of therapy. I would talk to people 15, 20 minutes and I would get a good feel for them if it would be a good fit. But most times in therapy, they don't.
Okay, good point. But yes, realize just what we just said. Research who you're going to look for, realize that the power is in you. And the whole point is to say, okay, I need to realize with help that I'm not broken. So I'm going to do what's necessary to learn that, right?
That's interesting that you just said that. I was just thinking that people are not broken. The system is broken, because I don't think it educates the consumer very well, and they don't know what to do. And I think as a society, we're kind of broken. We've been, emotionally neglectful for years, and we got to catch up and start. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I want to get information out there that's accessible and affordable. And so people can start educating themselves about how to do this, and that they're not broken. We're not broken.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
And on that topic, it's interesting because when we experience these emotions, because like you're saying, we haven't been trained on how to do them, then we feel bad and we judge ourselves against others. Well, they don't feel that way, so I shouldn't feel this way. Therefore, there must be something wrong with me. And they have those feelings of I'm broken, nobody will love me, yada, yada. And that just gets worse and worse, and they turn to different behaviors. So what we try to do is get to the depth. And everything that I've learned is people turn to these behaviors, and then society looks at the behavior and say, let's fix the behavior. When in reality, we need to look at the emotions. And once we understand them, not only is the behavior not a problem anymore, but now the person knows that they are okay and that they are whole.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times, I love this, because you're right. A lot of times we're taught to try and figure things out with our minds. So we overthink and we think, what's wrong with me? What's going on? Why can't I fix this? Why can they fix this? But if you allow yourself to drop down into your body, wherever your emotion is, even just breathing. There's a TED Talk on taking 6 to 8 breaths with whatever emotion is coming up for you and watching it shift.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's powerful stuff.
Yes, it's very powerful. Anytime I think that you realize you're overthinking and you just keep spinning your wheels, I tell my clients, okay, that's the time to really drop into your body and figure out what the emotion is, and listen to the emotion, breathe into the emotion. See, a lot of times our emotions are talking to us too. They have messages if we listen to them.
Oh, yeah.
So watch that overthinking, because we can't solve those kind of problems sometimes with our thinking. Sometimes we can if we have a negative belief that keeps fueling it. I'm not worthy is a negative belief. And that fuels a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of sadness, a lot of fear. If you change that negative belief, then you change how you feel. So they are connected. I write about that in my book also. But sometimes you can't change the belief, so go down to the emotion. That's what I believe anyway.
Okay.
There's lots
And
of healing potential if you allow your emotion and use your breath.
absolutely. Where can people find this workbook of yours?
It's on Amazon. It's called The Max Method, How to Love Yourself and Become Who You're Meant to Be. They can also find my website at Max Method, and it's maxxmethod.com.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be putting a link up on the front page of my website for the book. But yeah.
Perfect. Well, Christy, this has been an enjoyable conversation. I appreciate your time teaching us all about these good things. I think it helps a lot of the listeners just to, add to their knowledge base so they have power over their decisions.
Yeah.
Listeners, thank you for joining today for another episode of the Champions of Self podcast, and we'll see you all later.
Thanks for having me.